Mr. Chairman, while waiting,
Senator
just a brief comment is, like many of you, I've heard from fire chiefs, fire departments across my state about the importance of getting this done swiftly. I think I've heard a number of potential amendments, some of which I think make good sense. Senator Paul and I have worked together to try to ensure there's transparency around questions about the origins of COVID. I think that there's some suggestions about even some immigration-related policy that's been proposed to attach to this. I just, from a governance standpoint, you know, folks stand to die or be grievously injured by fire, immense property damage. If we use this as a vehicle for a bunch of unrelated policy and it gets referred to a bunch of other committees in the House, then we're not going to get this through the process expeditiously, and that could put our constituents at risk. So my inclination here is that, and I just would humbly submit this to my colleagues, we should just get this done. I'm always ready to work with my Republican colleagues on matters of common interest where there's good policy to do, but, you know, lives in Georgia and in all of our states hang in the balance while these grants aren't moving, and so I hope we can just move this through the process and work together on other matters through the appropriate vehicle. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, I appreciate it, Senator Ossoff. And I just want to remind all the members again, the bill before us without amendments is the exact bill that we passed unanimously out of this committee last year because of the urgency you mentioned. Senator Sinema?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I just want to note that I feel like we've gotten off to a bit of a rocky start with the committee this year, and I've really enjoyed serving on this committee for the last 4 years. It's a committee that covers topics that I know are important to all of us, particularly important to me in my home state of Arizona. And I would just hope that maybe after today's committee hearing, we might be able to get back together in a setting and kind of talk through some of the challenge we may have faced at the beginning of this session and find a way for us to work collaboratively together, as I think we've enjoyed doing so for the last number of years. I think the work that this committee does is very important. As I said, it's very important to my home state. And I think there are opportunities for us to find compromise and to work together and to do it in a way where we can actually get a lot of really good stuff done. So what I'd like to suggest is that, you know, maybe after today, we spend a little bit of time thinking, how do we work through some of the challenges that we're facing so that we can find a way to move forward together in a collaborative way. Thanks.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Hassan.
Well, I would certainly echo Senator Sinema's sentiments and also associate myself with those of Senator Ossoff. I'm glad we're holding this markup, and I support some of the filed amendments that may be offered today, and I've even co-sponsored one of them as a standalone bill, but we can't jeopardize critical funding for firefighters, and I believe we need to advance this grant reauthorization bill today without attaching other legislation to it. As chair of the Emerging Threats and Spending Oversight Subcommittee, I'll always work to ensure that firefighters have the resources and equipment that they need to protect the health and safety of our communities, and that is what this bill is about. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Hassan. Senator Paul.
Amendment 1. There are more than one perspective. One perspective is we should never put any amendments on it because we can go through easily without amendments. But we also wind up with a $31 trillion debt that we face because we never really reform anything. So, you know, one of the amendments, the one that I'll offer first, is to have a duplicate scoring. A few years ago, I remember somebody came up with some sort of new government housing program, and someone happened to look and see how many we had, and they had like 82 programs already. A lot of these are well-intended and well-meaning, and people say, oh, well, we just want to help people, and so they have a bill to help people, but they don't look and see that we've already got 82 bills already doing the same thing. We never go back and reevaluate whether any of the programs are working or try to fix any things we do. We just add more. And so, you know, this First Amendment would direct the Government Accounting Office to analyze legislation reported by any congressional committee and provide a report to Congress whether the legislation would create a duplicative program, office, or initiative. Over the past 12 years, GAO has documented more than 1,100 cases of duplicative programs. But have we done anything about it? No, because everybody says it's not the time. It's not the place, young man. We're going to do this on another bill. We'll do it a freestanding bill, which never happens. So the other perspective that I bring to this committee is Put it on something that is popular, that's going to pass, and you'll finally get something done that would actually help some of our spending problems and the duplicate spending problems. But by always being afraid to amend any bill saying it'll slow things down, this bill has a great deal of popularity, and this bill's going to pass no matter what you put on it. That's the reason to put something good on it that would actually reform things. With regard to whether or not fire departments will quit putting out fires tomorrow if they don't get this, the statistics show that it's like 95% of the fire departments in every community and every locality are provided for by local taxes, as they always were historically, till we forgot about the 10th Amendment and began doing things like this at the federal level. But nobody's closing their fire department down because of this. This program also doesn't expire for another year. If we were to do this duplication report by adopting GAO's recommendations, agencies could have saved the taxpayers over $500 billion. My amendment would prevent duplicative programs from happening in the first place. This is a bipartisan bill, co-sponsored by a member of this committee and passed out of this committee by voice vote in the last Congress. It's not controversial and ought to be able to pass. People say separate them. If you separate them, somebody's going to object, and this one won't pass unanimously. But if it's attached to the fire, if you really like this bill and it's attached to this fire grant program, it will pass. So the argument doesn't hold water. They're going to wait for another time. Waiting for another time basically kills this bill. Putting it on this bill actually allows it to pass. I appreciate the chairman's past support for this measure and others on the committee, and I hope they will do the right thing and actually try to get this bill passed today.
Senator Paul, just to remind folks on the committee, the Senate Bill 559 authorizes appropriations for critical fire prevention, control, and recovery programs. These programs have had long bipartisan support, and the version of this bill was introduced in the 117th Congress and passed by a voice vote out of this committee last year. My staff have certainly had productive conversations with Ranking Member Paul's staff regarding We'll now proceed to consideration of Scott Amendment 3 to S559.
The underlying bill authorizes $15.7 billion over the next 7 years and increases the current levels by $130 million for the Fire Administration and $343 million for the fire grants programs, for a total increase of about $500 million. The overall program is about $15 billion, because this is, not an inconsequential amount of money in an era where we have over $1 trillion budgets. I'd like to replace the Scott Amendment with a second-degree amendment, which would be identical to the language of Paul Amendment 3. Paul Amendment 3 is the vaccine amendment, and earlier,
just hold for a moment.
Well, I still have the debate time. I'm still arguing my case. So earlier, the chair replaced my amendment with a secondary amendment because they were playing basically a legislative sort of prank on the American public, so the other side wouldn't have to vote directly on a vaccine amendment. So basically, we will do exactly the same thing and offer a second-degree amendment to the Scott Amendment. And this amendment will be my Amendment 3, which says that fire houses that fired people for vaccines would not be eligible for grants. We request a recorded vote.
I also have a second-degree amendment, and I recognize myself to offer a second-degree amendment. My second-degree amendment would direct GAO to issue an audit of the U.S. Fire Administration within 3 years of enactment to continue improving control.
Point of inquiry.
Yes, go ahead.
We have, unlimited second-degree amendments?
We have a second-degree amendment. I've recognized myself for my second-degree amendment.
Your second-degree amendment to a second-degree amendment. So
no, it's a second-degree amendment is being offered to the Scott Amendment.
No, I already called up a second-degree amendment to the Scott Amendment.
You can't call it up, Senator. Only the chair can call it up.
Well, I was recognized to call it up the same way we have recognized for every other amendment. You recognized me and I called it up.
You were recognized to call up for a vote. Only the chair can do that.
Well, I was recognized to introduce an amendment, and I introduced a second-degree amendment. I don't know how you can stop that or decide that the rules are that you can do
The chair
unlimited
can call up
second-degree.
the amendments as the chair sees fit, and my second-degree amendment is being called up.
After my second-degree amendment had already been called up. So you're offering,
not been called
you're
up.
offering a third-degree amendment.
It had not been called up.
Well, sure you are.
I am offering an amendment to the
And I would
to the
say,
Scott
if
amendment.
this is the way you're going to run the committee, I would suggest that the Republicans leave. I don't see why we should stick around if you're going to make up the rules. I mean,
these
you're going to
are not
offer a
rules.
third-degree amendment?
Chairman?
These are not.
Chair,
Senator Sinema.
Mr. Chair, might I humbly suggest that we can work through these procedural issues to take all of the votes? And I would just suggest we all take a couple minutes, lower the temperature, and just figure out what the procedure is and follow it. There's no need for us to turn this committee hearing into a partisan, ugly place like we've seen in other committees. We don't need to do that.
This is the first time we've had a hearing since I've been here that I know of where we've gotten second-degree amendments on every one of our amendments to avoid voting on the amendment. So we simply have done the same thing by offering a second-degree amendment to the Scott Amendment. It was offered from this microphone after I was recognized to offer it, and now they're going back on it and trying to change the rules. I, for one, won't stay here and would recommend that no Republicans stay here if we're going to have third-degree amendments that only the majority gets to
Well,
offer.
Senator Paul, might I suggest that we just take a moment, ask those who understand the rules of the committee to just explain it to all of us, and then we'll follow them. We don't have to escalate this to a situation where folks are walking out. We can just ask folks who can explain the rules to us, and then we'll follow them. I think
Who
we
will
could
we
do that.
ask? Just the majority staff?
No, let's consult with folks. I mean, the rules of the committee are written down. We can follow them. I just don't think that we don't need to escalate this to become a spectacle. Everyone can have their votes and we can move forward.
I recognize myself for a second-degree amendment that would direct the GAO to issue an audit of the U.S. Fire Administration within 3 years of enactment to continue and improve congressional oversight. I urge my colleagues to join me in supporting this bill or this amendment. If there's no further debate on the amendment, the question is on its adoption. All those in favor will say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Majority of members present having voted in the affirmative, the second degree amendment is agreed to.
But, Mr. Chairman, we were just voting on your secondary amendment. Could I be recorded as a no?
Yes, Senator Hawley be recorded as a no. And Senator Langford is a no. Okay, now I go here. No. Which no? If there's no further debate on Scott 1, the question is on its adoption as modified by the Peters second degree amendment. All those in favor? Or Scott Meeks, Scott 3, I'm sorry. If there's no further debate on Scott Amendment number 3, the question is on its adoption as modified by the Peters second degree amendment. All those in favor will say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. No. Senator Langford is recognized as a no. Senator Hawley. The majority of members having voted in the affirmative, the amendment is agreed to. We will now move to final passage. If there's no further debate or amendment, the question is on final passage of S559 as amended. All those in favor will say aye. Aye. Opposed will say nay. The majority of members having voted in the affirmative, the ayes have it. The bill is reported favorably. Does any member wish to be recognized for any final comments? If not, this business meeting stands adjourned.
I defer to Senator Paul.
Ayn Rand's Howard Roark points out the ingratitude that man has for the entrepreneur, the creator. Thousands of years ago, the first man discovered how to make fire. He was probably burnt at the stake he taught the others to light. But he left them a gift that had not been conceived, and he lifted darkness from the face of the earth. Now, Starbucks didn't exactly discover fire, but Starbucks did somehow, somewhere discover in the depths of man's soul that he would pay as much for a double mocha latte as he once did for a week's worth of coffee. My wife Kelly and I tried to get my grandparents some fancy coffee once, and my grandfather, a survivor of the Depression, informed us in no uncertain terms that he drank Maxwell House, $3.99 for a week's worth of coffee. The Pauls, although German, often missed the zeitgeist of the times, and so while we continue to purchase Maxwell House, others, our contemporaries, bought Starbucks stock and did much better than we did. Who knew people would pay $6 for a cup of coffee? But I digress. Convincing the public to buy very expensive coffee is not the discovery of fire, but still it deserves respect. Instead, Congress convenes today not to praise Starbucks, but to bury them. The hearing today is convened to attack a private company for its success, when its success has benefited both customers and its employees alike. We've heard of the average wages, over $17. We've heard of the 401k plans. We've heard of the parental leave, even for part-time employees. Starbucks giving away tens of millions of dollars each year. They have 100% tuition and fee for a bachelor's degree. Maybe it doesn't sound like too bad a place to work. Starbucks is among the most charitable companies in the country. Since 2016, they've had a program to give away unused food to feed over 5 million hungry families. Starbucks didn't do all this under orders from a government bureau. They did it because capitalism works. We have more charity when we have more money, when we have more success, when we have more profit. Nobody buys $6 coffee in impoverished nations. We're an extraordinarily rich nation. Marion Tupy and Gail Pooley wrote a book called Superabundance. They say we live in an era of superabundance. Starbucks can only exist in an era of superabundance. The average calorie count since when I was born was about 2,800. It's gone up to 3,700. Many would argue you have too much food. You can buy 7 times as much food for the same amount of worker hours. If you measure stuff in time prices, how many hours of the average worker it takes to buy something, it's extraordinary how wealthy we are. Even in inflation-adjusted terms, from 1960 to today, 1950 to today, the average income, inflation-adjusted, is up 4-fold. These are all extraordinary tales. This is also an extraordinary tale of a company that started out of nothing and employs tens of thousands of people, all making great wages. And we're here to say, as if this is like, Charles Dickens. I mean, we think it's 1812. I mean, it's an amazing success story we live in, the era of superabundance. In 1820, 96% of people lived on less than $2 a day. Adjusted for inflation, you know how much of the world lives that way? Less than 10%. Trade, capitalism, profit. People all the time are talking about, we want sustainable this and sustainable that. You know what's sustainable? Capitalism and profit and employment. You want to put all the Starbucks workers in the government dole? You want to have a government coffee company? You know, what are we talking about here? If you don't want their coffee, be like my family and buy Maxwell House. But for goodness sakes, don't deride one of the great American success stories. This is not who we are. We are better than this. If the goal is to destroy the goose that laid the golden egg, then by all means, this hearing is a good beginning. For me, I see the fabulous success of Starbucks, and I understand that the luxury to spend an extraordinary amount of money for a cup of coffee is a testament to capitalism. It's a testament to the fact that we have enough money that we can do that. When I walk in Starbucks, I don't see billionaires buying coffee. I see everyone from top to bottom in there paying for the coffee because they've decided the quality is worth it. But I don't want to be part of any witch hunt that vilifies any American business, so count me out. Count me as one who is ecstatic that Starbucks is an American success story, and I'll have no part in trashing their success.
Thank you. Senator Hickenlooper, you have to preside soon, so you ask the first questions.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, Ranking Member. Mr. Schultz, I appreciate you coming before us, and I realize...
S824. Does any member wish to offer an amendment? Senator Paul.
My amendment would narrow the bill to the provisions requiring the President to submit a national critical infrastructure resilience strategy. This amendment is intended to address concerns about CISA's demonstrated weaponization of information against America's free speech rights by striking the provisions that would allow them to accumulate more data and information from the private sector. This change helps ensure that the privacy of individuals and organizations is protected and that information is not used inappropriately by CISA.
Senator Hassan.
Mr. Chair, I oppose Senator Paul's amendment. The National Risk Management Act is a bipartisan bill based on a bipartisan recommendation from the Cyberspace Solarium Commission, and I want to thank Senator Romney for co-sponsoring this bill with me. The bill codifies the Solarium Commission's recommendation that the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA, conduct a risk assessment of all sectors of critical infrastructure and develop a strategy for government to work with industry to protect critical infrastructure. As the Solarium Commission noted, it's important that CISA periodically receive information and update its risk assessments and the strategy for mitigating these evolving risks. This bill provides a transparent process for CISA to accept information from all stakeholders, and it allows, but does not require, industry owners and operators to submit additional information that they believe CISA should consider. We'd be doing our communities a disservice to force them to rely on old, outdated assessments and strategies. For that reason, I urge my colleagues to oppose Senator Paul's amendment. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Romney.
I'd add my support to Senator Hassan's comments, which is this is basically saying that we'd like to have an assessment of our cyber risks to critical infrastructure. We're talking about power grids, pipelines, our defense industrial base, our water systems, transportation systems. So it's making an assessment on an every 5-year basis of how vulnerable we are. The data we're collecting is all done voluntarily. Is just saying to the private enterprises, if you would like to provide this information so that we can learn from one another and share the risks and vulnerabilities, we can do so. I think it's pretty clear looking around the world that there are adversaries that would like to potentially interfere with our critical infrastructure and use that as a weapon, potentially a very dangerous weapon that would put us on our knees. So we need this information. I believe that companies will be happy to provide this because it's going to be in their interest. But again, it's voluntary. This is not required. It's voluntary. And those that oppose this amendment say, well, but there might be, pressure from the public that why aren't you providing this information? My goodness, companies can stand up to opinions in the public, and they have to do what they believe is in the best interest of their enterprise and in the safety of our infrastructure. So we really should not adopt this amendment, and instead put in place the requirement to have CISA carry out this assessment on every 5-year basis. I'd love to see it done more regularly than that, but at least on a 5-year basis, what the risks are to our critical infrastructure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Romney. If there's no further debate on the Paul Amendment 1 amendment, the question's on its adoption. All those in favor will say aye. All those opposed, nay.
No.
The majority of members having voted in the negative, the nays have it. The amendment is not agreed to. The Paul Amendment number 1 is not adopted. If there's no further debate or amendment, the question's on final passage of S 824. The clerk will call the roll.
Senator Carper.
No by proxy. Or, excuse me, aye by proxy. Aye by proxy.
Senator Hassan.
Aye.
Senator Sinema. Aye. Senator Rosen. Senator Padilla. Aye. Senator Ossoff. Senator Blumenthal. Senator Paul.
No.
Senator Johnson.
Aye by proxy.
Senator Langford. Aye. Senator Romney. Aye. Senator Scott. Aye. Senator Hawley. Aye. Senator Marshall.
Aye by proxy.
Senator Peters.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, on the vote of those present, the yeas are 11, the nays are 1. On the vote by proxy, and for the record only, the yeas are 3, the nays are 0. On this vote, the yeas are 11, the nays are 1, and the motion is agreed to.
We will proceed to consideration of S 884. Does any member wish to offer an amendment? Seeing no amendments are being offered and there's no further debate, the question's on final passage of S 884. The clerk will call the roll.
Senator Carper.
Aye by proxy.
Senator Hassan.
Aye.
Senator Sinema.
Aye.
Senator Rosen. Senator Padilla. Senator Ossoff. Senator Blumenthal. Senator Paul.
No.
Senator Johnson.
Aye by proxy.
Senator Langford. Senator Romney. Senator Scott. Senator Hawley. Senator Marshall.
Aye by proxy.
Senator Peters.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, on the vote of those present, the yeas are 11, the nays are 1. On the vote by proxy, and for the record only, the yeas are 3, the nays are 0. On this vote, the yeas are 11, the nays are 1, and the motion is agreed to.
We'll now proceed to consideration of S 932. If there's no further debate, the question's on final passage of S.
Mr. Chairman, could I be added as a co-sponsor to S 932?
Absolutely. Senator Hawley be added as a co-sponsor to S 932. The clerk will now call the roll.
Senator Carper.
Aye by proxy.
Senator Hassan.
Aye.
Senator Sinema.
Aye.
Senator Rosen. Senator Padilla. Senator Ossoff. Senator Blumenthal. Senator Paul.
Aye.
Senator Johnson.
Aye by proxy.
Senator Langford. Senator Romney. Senator Scott. Senator Hawley. Senator Marshall.
Aye by proxy.
Senator Peters.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, on the vote of those present, the yeas are 12, the nays are 0. On this vote by proxy, on the vote by proxy, for the record only, the yeas are 3, the nays are 0. On this vote, the yeas are 12, the nays are 0, and the motion is agreed to.
We'll proceed to consideration of S 933. If there's no further debate, the question's on final passage of S 933. The clerk will call the roll.
Senator Carper.
Aye by proxy.
Senator Hassan.
Aye.
Senator Sinema.
Aye.
Senator Rosen. Senator Padilla. Senator Ossoff. Senator Blumenthal. Senator Paul.
Aye.
Senator Johnson.
Aye by proxy.
Senator Langford. Senator Romney. Senator Scott. Senator Hawley. Senator Marshall.
Aye by proxy.
Senator Peters.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, on the vote of those present, the yeas are 12, the nays are 0. On the vote by proxy and for the record only, the yeas are 3, the nays are 0. On this vote, the yeas are 12, the nays are 0, and the motion is agreed to.
We'll now proceed to consideration.
The great thing about capitalism is that supply and demand intersect, and you get the largest supply at the least cost when you allow capitalism to function. Now, capitalism doesn't function very well in the drug markets because the government's been involved for a long time. But prices need to be based on supply and demand. A publicly traded company to promise to base their prices on bullying from a politician would actually be in breach of their fiduciary duty. I mean, it's actually illegal to say, I'm going to make all the prices go down in my company, but it would also be irrational because if you did and there were no profit margin, the companies would be gone and they would no longer exist. Mr. Riggs, if a patient has a copay of $50, would the rational decision be then to choose Lispro over Humalog?
In the case where they were buying one unit, yes, they pay $25, not $50.
Right. So if the patient had a copay of $25 and Lispro is $25 and Humalog's $100, but I'm only going to pay $25, is there any rational reason why I would want to buy the least expensive? Why not buy the more expensive drug at that point?
Well, they're identical. In that case, they'd be indifferent because they're paying $25 out of pocket either way.
So here's the interesting thing. The lower the copay, the less the consumer cares about the price. So you can mandate lower and lower copays, but you might actually get the opposite. You might actually drive consumers towards something that's actually more expensive. So for example, under Obamacare, we made birth control have no copay. So there's no copay for birth control, but if you look at the price of birth control as it became free, the demand became enormous or greatly enhanced, and so the prices went up. From 2013 to 2019, you had a threefold increase in the price of birth control. So the most important thing is we think things through. We all want lower prices, but if you want to mandate lower co-prices for things, you may well get the opposite because you're taking away the consumer from the equation. Now, the consumer is only involved in drug prices through the copay or the deductible. And so much of healthcare, 80, 90% of it's beyond that. And so how do we lower co-prices or we lower prices for drugs? People hire an intermediary. Dr. Kautzner, does anybody hire you, what, businesses, labor unions, because they want higher prices?
Absolutely not, Senator.
If you didn't provide lower prices, would they hire either another PBM or do it on their own?
So we exist in a highly competitive market. So if we didn't deliver the value that we commit to our clients, they would certainly go elsewhere.
So it's quite confusing. We want to blame PBMs for everything, but why do people hire them? No one's forcing anybody to hire them. So as I understand, the companies represented here represent tens of thousands of businesses who voluntarily come to you and hire you. And they pay you and you make a profit. So your profit, is it exorbitant? Is your profit, Ms. Cianfrocco, is your profit greater than the drug company somehow?
Senator, our margin is 4%, roughly 4% for the services we provide to all of our clients.
So that's about like Walmart. I mean, I'm surprised we don't have Walmart here today to beat up on Walmart. We're all unhappy, but we have to be rational about what we're doing. So spread pricing, everybody's like, oh, this terrible spread pricing. Dr. Kautzner, do you offer spread pricing and also pass-through pricing?
Yes, Senator, we offer both options to our clients today. Roughly 1/3 choose spread pricing, 2/3 choose a pass-through type of model. They choose spread pricing in order to have predictability on their pharmacy benefits, so we shield them from incremental costs because we effectively provide them with a guarantee or a lock-in on price.
Which is more expensive, spread pricing or pass-through pricing when you offer it?
So we're agnostic to the type of pricing that we offer. It's more for the client to make that decision.
Price. Is spread pricing cheaper or more expensive than pass-through pricing if I'm a customer?
Generally, they're going to be roughly equal in price or cost.
Ms.
There may be
same question.
You're referring to spread pricing as the mechanism where a client pays one price for all the pharmacy claims adjudicated. It offers predictability. In often cases, it offers controlled pricing and can be less expensive than if they pay every claim on a pass-through model, but both are offered to our clients.
This needs to be pretty clear, and people need to think through. We have a bill before us to ban spread pricing. So at least one of the companies, and I think others have said this, spread pricing is less expensive than pass-through pricing. So we're going to ban the cheaper form of buying your drug insurance. Why would we ban the cheaper form? It sounds like if you ban the cheaper form, you might get the opposite result of what you're intending. You might actually get higher prices. Not to mention why we should be banning any of this, but is there a possibility you ban spread pricing and then people decide to add more of a fee on the pass-through pricing? Because, see, their obligation is to their stockholders, and they're legally bound to make a profit. So if you tell them they can't make a profit here, wouldn't they have to try to make a profit somewhere else if they're going to please their stockholders? But the thing is we haven't thought this through. We're angry. Everybody's angry. I'm angry. I've gone to the drugstore before and seen something for $1,600, an acne cream. So we're angry. But why is it so obscure? Why is it different than electronics? Why is it different than buying a car? Why is it different than a lot of expensive things? Because we've made it opaque through all of these different things that we've mandated. In the 1930s, we passed antitrust law, the Robinson-Patman Act, and we made it illegal to pass through discounts based on volume. And then we had a court case in the 90s that says you have to move market share and all these complicated things to get these rebates. But the bottom line is, in a free society, rational thinking, labor unions and businesses and health organizations are choosing a PBM. Why are they choosing a PBM? Do you think they want higher prices? And if a PBM is gouging, then why don't they go to another PBM? There's like 70 some odd PBMs. And yet we've got it in our heads somehow we're going to forbid this. So in the License Pro example, Dr. Couchner, so what happens to that? If we have a $25 copay and you got $100 Humalog and you got a bigger rebate and you're going to make more profit on the rebate, are you keeping License Pro off of your list, or can I get License Pro if I'm a business and I have people who are diabetic in my business?
Thanks for the question, Senator. So our focus is on lowest net cost of the product. And so that's where we're focused the most. And as we all know, all insulins are not created equal. We actually separate insulins into 3 different categories as well. But our focus is lowest net cost to patients.
Let's say they were equal. You had Humalog and License Pro. It's the same thing. And License Pro is $100 and you get a $75 rebate to make it $25. So now we're equal price to the business you're selling your plan to. But there is more rebate. Does that mean you're excluding License Pro from a list that if I'm a business? Is it somehow working that way to exclude cheaper generics is my question.
Our focus is on where lowest net cost is available for products.
So I think there is a possibility, and I think that might be one complaint. There is a possibility of this. However, here's the rub. They are still giving you the lowest net price. And so if you say, well, gosh, the generic, I'd rather have the generic, it's underneath the copay. So it's outside of what the negotiation is. And so that's the only way it's going to make a difference to the consumer. But actually, I think that in the long run, as we look at it, the net cost is still what we're looking at. And so when everybody shakes their head and says, oh, the net cost, the list price mean absolutely nothing, the same way they mean nothing in medicine. But the thing is, we got this complicated thing. This isn't capitalism. We got this because of antitrust laws in the 30s. We got this from a court case based on the antitrust law in the 90s. And we have this complicated system. But instead of trying to unravel the complications we put on the market, what we're asking is to ban certain contracts. So I think what you're going to have in the end is you're going to have the unintended consequences of doing something, trying to make things better, and actually make the situation worse.
Senator Paul, thank you. Senator Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to our witnesses today.
39, the Pharmacy Benefit Managers Reform Act. Are there any members who wish to speak or offer an amendment to S. 1339? Senator Paul.
This is Paul Amendment 1. Mr. Chairman, PBM rebates are a complex subject. We're told that PBMs are middlemen who drive up drug prices, but insurance companies hire PBMs to do the opposite, to negotiate with drug companies to lower prices. The drug company wants to sell high, the insurance company wants to buy low. PBMs use their bargaining power to drive prices down, not up. The real problem with drug prices is that consumers are removed from what their drugs cost, so they aren't price conscious. There's no market signal for what consumers would willingly pay, so the only downward pressure on what drug makers will charge comes from PBMs. This bill bans spread pricing, which small businesses and startups often choose because the PBMs take on the additional risk for themselves. The big 3 PBMs have a diversified business model, but some smaller PBMs depend on spread pricing for over 90% of their business. Banning these contracts may actually put smaller PBMs out of business and make the big 3 bigger. So instead of punishing or restricting the big PBMs, you may actually be making them stronger with this legislation. So maybe we should ask, who is this bill supposed to help? Big Pharma loves this bill. Big Pharma would love to weaken PBMs. They are their adversary in the marketplace because PBMs counteract the size and bargaining power of Big Pharma. In a recent op-ed in the Washington Times, it was pointed out that this bill also helps the biggest 3 drug wholesalers. 3 of the 15 wealthiest companies in America who control 90% of the prescription drug supply will benefit by taking the PBMs out of the equation. Drug companies want to maximize their sales, and they offer rebates, so PBMs will put their drugs on the plan's formulary, where it will reach the most patients. But why use rebates at all? Why not offer the discounts up front as they once were? The reason is a Depression-era antitrust law called Robinson-Patman, which makes it illegal for anyone who sells commodities to offer different prices based on who they are selling to. The FTC hasn't really enforced this law in 40 years, but since it's on the books, it still affects the market behavior. In 1994, this changed dramatically with a lawsuit. A group of pharmacies filed a class action suit under Robinson-Patman against the big drug companies for not giving the pharmacies the same discounts that they gave to HMOs. HMOs got the discounts because they could influence which doctors prescribe and influence behavior. As part of the settlement, the drug companies were allowed to offer discounts, but only retroactively after a buyer showed the ability to move market share. That's how we got the rebate system. The rebate system isn't a function of the marketplace, it's a function of this lawsuit and this antitrust law. That's why we have this bizarre, opaque thing that everybody complains about. So instead of removing the primary cause, we want to add regulations to this, which will further complicate it and may have unintended consequences. I say let's remove the primary cause. Could I have unanimous consent to have 1 more minute? I won't speak anymore on this.
Go ahead. Go.
So why is the pharmaceutical industry now trying to get rid of rebates? Well, if we eliminate rebates but keep Robinson-Patman in place, the PBMs will basically be disarmed. They will have less power and less leverage against the drug companies. Drug companies will point to the risk of antitrust lawsuits as an excuse not to offer upfront discounts. And since the bill in front of us will make rebates to the PBMs less able to do this, there won't be any market check on drug prices. When that happens, just imagine the outcry we'll have for more government price controls in the ensuing years. The alternative is to let PBMs do their job. There are plenty of ways they could do it without rebates, but only if Congress repeals Robinson-Patman first. That's what my amendment would do, to repeal the first cause of all of this mess, of all of the rebate system, which is the Robinson-Patman Act.
Okay, thank you, Senator Paul. Let me just jump in and say Senator Paul raises some interesting issues, which I look forward to dealing with in the future. Unfortunately, Senator Paul's amendment would repeal, as he just mentioned, the Robinson-Patman Act of 1936, which is a federal antitrust law intended to prevent price discrimination. We have consulted with a parliamentarian, and it is my determination that this amendment lies in the Judiciary Committee's jurisdiction and would be in violation of Rule 15 of the standing rules of the Senate. Accordingly, I rule it out of order.
Okay. So, Mr. Chairman, that means you will not be allowing a vote?
It's not within the jurisdiction of the committee.
But that's, your ruling is that there will not be a vote allowed?
Correct. Okay, but it is an issue that I look forward to working with you on. Further discussion.
Mr. Chairman?
Senator Romney.
I call up Romney Amendment number 2. As you know, this legislation prohibits spread price contracting. My amendment would preserve the option for employers to consider spread price contracts, but would require PBMs to also present a plan sponsor with at least one non-spread price contract. A vast majority of small and middle-sized employers prefer spread price contracting because it's lower cost and more certainty for them. That's why they choose it. Making that illegal is not going to help small or mid-sized businesses. Our understanding as well is that the majority of unions also prefer spread price contracting. So my amendment allows spread price contracting to be offered to employers and unions, but it also says that the PBM has to provide a non-spread price option as well. I would note that when infused with transparency that this amendment provides, spread pricing will provide employers predictability, risk mitigation, and encourage broader access to low-cost generics. Prohibiting spread pricing will not save sponsors money. The CBO reported that this amendment, by the way, does not add or reduce the deficit. Instead, it could well result in PBMs increasing the amount of service fees. So as a result, I am very much in favor of allowing, if you will, consenting entities, unions, employers, and PBMs to enter into the contracts they think provide them the lowest cost and the greatest degree of certainty. At the same time, insisting on more transparency such that the entities will see an option which is a non-spread pricing option and will be able to choose between them. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Romney. Further discussion? Is Senator, I'm sorry. Okay. This amendment, Senator Romney's amendment, would create an exception to the PBM bill's ban on spread pricing. I'm concerned that this amendment would allow PBMs to continue to profit by charging employers and plans more for a drug than they pay the pharmacy. Under the agreement that I made with Ranking Member Cassidy, at the appropriate time, I will make a motion to table this amendment. Senator Cassidy.
I understand Senator Romney's concern, and we want to be mindful absolutely of the plan sponsors. But when we speak to the employers, we don't get the same impression that they're supportive of this, or that they're even aware that spread pricing is part of their contract. I have 2 letters to submit for the record, one signed by 40 business groups and the other by the National Federation of Independent Businesses, in which both advocate eliminating spread pricing. Now, on a kind of different note, though, philosophically understand where you're coming from, and we, I'm told, did work with your staff to try and get it into a place where technically it could work, and that was difficult to do. It was just, we could not do it prior to this hearing. So that said, I will join in opposing the amendment.
Further discussion?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I would note that we spoke with the NFIB, and they are not, in fact, supportive of a full ban on spread pricing. They support limitations on spread pricing, which is precisely what my amendment does. There's no question, but the entities would like to be able to have a choice, and that's what my amendment does, which is allow spread pricing to exist for those that want it, but they must also be given an option of a non-spread pricing alternative. So it gives them exactly what this bill wants to do. It gives them transparency and a non-spread pricing alternative. But if they, and by the way, talk to unions. Unions want spread pricing because they want the certainty that spread pricing provides. And it is lower cost for them than the alternative. So banning spread pricing is going to increase costs for many small businesses, not all, and for many unions. So why not let them, again, why not let consenting entities decide what's the best contract for them, instead of having us as government step in and say, you can't contract the way you want to. What I'm saying is, you can contract the way you want to, but the PBM has to give you at least one alternative, which is not spread pricing. So you get to make the comparison.
Senator Paul.
I think Senator Romney makes a great point, and we need to realize people are all consumed with, we want to lower prices, and we all do, but realize what this bill does. This bill takes away choices. So there is a choice in the marketplace between spread pricing and pass-through. Every company has it. You're going to take this choice away, and he's exactly right. Some labor unions actually like this choice and choose this. Some small businesses do. In fact, the PBMs compete on this model. The smaller PBMs absorb more risk and offer a cheaper product, which is the spread pricing. Small businesses choose it on price, and the smaller PBMs do it to try to take away market share from the bigger PBMs. So what this bill should be called is the consolidation of the PBM market to enhance the monopolization of the PBM trade, because that may be what happens here. So I don't think we're being thoughtful on this. It's why we should probably vote this down completely and start over and have a discussion over the next year how we could lower prices, because this, in all likelihood, is going to have the opposite effect by banning something. But the ultimate thing it does here is it bans choice.
And
Senator Cassidy.
I think we're being incredibly thoughtful. The Express Script testimony said in their demonstration projects that when they did non-spread pricing but directly fee-based, that they actually lowered costs for the plan sponsor. This idea was first brought to me by a smaller PBM, who, and I think I quoted their fee yesterday, which is a lower fee than the spread pricing, which has been documented to be both in the Part D, and which I'm told is, although this has not been researched, in the commercial market. I will again go back to this letter in which the 40 different business groups say that most companies are not aware that they are even getting a contract with spread pricing. And lastly, on the part of thoughtfulness, if you look at the fully insured market, the two are integrated. The PBM is integrated with the overall insurance plan. It's vertically integrated. So by increasing the cost of drugs, the overall plan is able to manipulate their medical loss ratio so as to kind of constrict it. So there's different ways in which that integrated PBM and insurance company arbitrage these drug prices to otherwise increase price for increased price. You don't have to believe me. When Express Scripts talked about it, they talked about how when they did not use express pricing, there was a 3.5% decrease in overall drug costs. That was their testimony.
Further discussion on Romney number 2. Okay, moving on. Senator Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, procedurally, I would like to withdraw Baldwin Amendment 1 to S 1339 and offer Baldwin Amendment 1 as modified. The Fair Drug Pricing Act, which I have introduced with Senator Braun, passed out of this committee as an amendment back in 2019 with bipartisan support, and I look forward to the same outcome later today. As I stated last week, our amendment would require drug companies to provide a transparency and justification report 30 days before raising the price of a drug by more than 10% in a single year or more than 25% over a 3-year period. The text before us, as it's being distributed today, improves upon the work that we did back in 2019 and incorporates technical assistance from Health and Human Services and the Food and Drug Administration. According to the Congressional Budget Office, the Fair Drug Pricing Act would not impact the deficit. Over a dozen states have passed some form of legislation requiring drug companies to report more information in their pricing practices. And I recognize that this has created a patchwork of state laws, and I'm committed to working on this issue with Ranking Member Cassidy as this bill moves to the floor. American taxpayers are footing the bill for the rising costs of drugs, and it is only fair to call on drug companies to share more information about why they are increasing prices for the drugs that our constituents depend upon. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment, and I want to extend my thanks to Ranking Member Cassidy for his continued work and partnership on this.
Further discussion on the Baldwin and Braun amendment.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Braun.
So this ought to be the lowest hanging fruit that we should get through on a day like this. I won't repeat what the senator has said, but I would hope that all Republicans and Democrats on this committee would vote for something that is simple as this. It's about transparency. We need more of it. We found that out yesterday. Urge everyone to vote for it here later on. Thank you.
Further discussion. Senator Cassidy.
I want to thank Senator Baldwin for continuing to work with me on this amendment. An important point of reference in this conversation is that at least 18 states have enacted varying laws on drug price transparency reporting requirements. Red states, blue states, my home state of Louisiana have acted in the absence of Congress legislating on this issue. However, if we enact Senator Baldwin's legislation, it would establish a federal reporting requirement that may conflict with the numerous other reporting requirements that already exist today. That would be hard to comply with and result in patients not getting the clearest information. I am not opposed to a federal reporting requirement for drug price transparency with the appropriate guardrails. but we should make sure that there isn't an unnecessary administrative burden that could have the unintended consequence of driving up compliance costs that are ultimately passed to the patient. I'd like to ask Senator Baldwin if she would agree to continue to work with me to see if we can find a way forward on preempting the patchwork of state laws and look to streamline the drug transparency reporting requirement before this reaches the Senate floor.
As I proffered in my statement just a moment ago, I look forward to working with you on the issue of a path forward on the various states who have enacted transparency and justification reports, and believe that our track record already in looking at this bill and this amendment and resolving issues should give us encouragement that we'll be able to do that by the time it reaches the floor.
I thank Senator Baldwin. Look forward to continuing to work together. With this agreement, I plan to support Baldwin number 1 when we proceed to votes later this morning.
Senator Paul?
I have Paul amendment.
Oh, before, I'm sorry, Rand. Let me just say a word on this one. I support Senator Baldwin's amendment, and I thank her for agreeing to modify it. This amendment is simple, straightforward. It will require pharmaceutical companies to disclose research and development costs, profits, and marketing expenses whenever they substantially increase the price of prescription drugs. According to a report from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, the pharmaceutical industry increased the price of more than 1,200 prescription drugs from July 2021 to July 2022. The Baldwin-Braun amendment tells the big drug companies, who combined made over $100 billion in 2021, that if they're going to substantially raise the price of prescription drugs, they have got to disclose to the American people the justification for those price hikes. I urge a yes vote on this amendment. Any further discussion on it? Senator Paul.
I offer Paul Amendment 2. Like the chairman, I believe in the power of collective bargaining. While I'm against firing workers who don't want to pay union dues, I do think there's a place for collective bargaining in a free market. People ought to be allowed to freely associate and leverage their economies of scale as long as it's voluntary and no one's coerced. Under the National Labor Relations Act, labor unions and union members are excluded from the federal antitrust laws as long as they are instituted for the purposes of mutual help. I actually think the NLRB got it right here. There is value in voluntary mutual help, and the law should recognize that. And I think we should extend the same principle to groups that have to negotiate with PBMs. One complaint I often hear about PBMs is that they're just too big and powerful, so the small pharmacies don't have a chance to get their fair contract terms from them. The argument makes a lot of sense. Now, there are already groups that collectively bargain for community pharmacies. They're called Pharmacy Service Administrative Organizations, and most of the small pharmacies use them. The problem is there's too many of them, they're too dispersed across the country to have real leverage. Over 80% of the community pharmacies use PSAOs, but every state in the union has at least 3 of them, and some have 8 or 9. When you compare that to the PBM market, where the PBMs account for over 230 million lives, it's easy to see the imbalance in the negotiation. My amendment would fix this problem by extending the same antitrust treatment that currently applies to labor unions, also to pharmacies, hospitals, and healthcare professionals. Any combination of these groups could band together and bargain collectively on the private market without fear of antitrust prosecution, as long as their combined book value is smaller than the PBM they're negotiating with. This amendment is modeled on a bill that passed the House of Representatives by a vote of 276 to 136 at the end of the Clinton administration. The chairman at that time, when in the House, was actually a supporter of this. The original bill only applied to healthcare professionals, so pharmacies would be added to it. But I think given the problems of our community pharmacists and many of our rural hospitals are facing with negotiating with PBMs, they deserve to be included as well. As a physician, I say if physicians deserve this kind of protection, don't pharmacists deserve it also? I ask for your support.
Thank you. Let me just say this again. I understand that Senator Paul is offering this amendment in order to empower independent pharmacies to negotiate together against PBMs and get better rates. He would do this by amending our nation's antitrust laws. We have consulted with the parliamentarian, and it is my determination that this amendment lies in the Judiciary Committee's jurisdiction and would be in violation of Rule 15 of the standing rules of the Senate. Accordingly, I rule it out of order.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Paul.
I understand the chairman's prerogative and the power to rule this out of order. The chairman also has the power to rule it in order and allow a vote on it. To have a debate over such a grand issue and silo off the different possible reforms and say, oh, we're going to fix it by not fixing the primary problem because that's in another committee's jurisdiction, I think isn't a rational way to approach these problems. And in the end, you may well get the unintended consequences of thinking you're doing something to the marketplace while not fixing first causes and ultimately making the situation worse. Thank you.
Thank you. Further discussion? Okay. Are there other amendments?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman.
We had
Mr. Chairman.
Senator who? Senator Markey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, first I'd like to offer Markey Amendment Number 1, which is co-led by my colleagues Senator Braun and Marshall. On March 29th, the FDA announced that the nasal spray naloxone, Narcan, would be available over the counter to help save people from opioid overdoses. It's a major and life-saving development, but the challenge remains that Narcan can only save lives if people can afford it. This amendment requires a GAO study on affordability and access of all forms of Narcan available by prescription and over-the-counter. The opioid epidemic is ravaging every community in the country with no regard to state lines or income levels, and today we are taking major steps forward to ensure life-saving medication is affordable and accessible for all Americans. This study will ensure that we continue that work, so I thank Senators Braun and Marshall and the majority and minority staff for their work on this amendment, and I urge its adoption.
Thank you. Further discussion on the Markey, Braun, Marshall?
Mr. Chairman.
Opening comments.
As a result of the COVID pandemic, over 1 million Americans died, and some estimate 6 million, but up to 18 million people died worldwide. The FBI, the Department of Energy, 18-month investigation by the HELP Committee, the Lancet Commission, all have concluded that the virus, in all likelihood, originated from the lab. I've been requesting records for the last 2 years from the Biden administration. I have asked 8 different Democrat chairmen to help with those records requests because the Biden administration objects to records requests unless they are signed by a chairman. And for the last 5 months, I've been working with the chairman of this committee to try to get records, and we still have had no records requests sent and no help from the majority party on this committee. So until there is any kind of production of records, we won't be supporting any unanimous consent passage of any legislation from this committee. We will also object to any nominees coming through the committee, and basically we'll be uncooperative with anything the majority wants to do unless the majority decides to cooperate in the request of records.
Thank you, Member Paul. We have been working with you on those letters and requests over that time. We've exchanged letters back and forth many, many times. It's certainly my intent to work with you on the information that you want to collect. We have letters to request documents that are sitting in your office right now that I'm prepared to sign. I know you wanted to have further discussion, and as we agreed, we're hoping to meet this week to make it happen. But no, my intent is sincere, and I think I've probably been more open than any other chair of any other committee to make sure that we get documents so that you can do the proper oversight that we have to do here as members of Congress.
There have been discussions back and forth, but I'll just give you a pictorial example of where the discussions are. With just one agency, the NIH, we've asked for 77 different questions and documents. The red are the examples of where your staff has said you will not give up documents. The green is the example of where you might help with documents. So as you can see, the vast majority of our records requests have been removed. And I'll leave you with this if your staff wants to look at it. But we don't feel like we are getting cooperation. We think we have 5 months of runaround and that we're not getting anywhere on the records request. And the thing is this isn't a partisan issue. This isn't even really, most of the information dates back to the Trump administration. So this isn't pointing fingers at Biden, saying Biden created the pandemic or anything like that. It's whether or not some science was not properly reviewed, whether some of that science was used in Wuhan, or whether an accident happened. That's all we want to know. And frankly, it's not partisan because it doesn't point towards Biden. We want to score no points for the Biden administration. Our only complaint with the Biden administration is they won't give it up. And realize that some of this stuff's already been given up. The Foreign Relations Committee has information that I want to see. They don't want to give it up. There are Republican members that have seen some of this information. I still haven't seen the information. So it's really a problem of everybody trying to hold secret stuff that is not classified, shouldn't be secret, and how do we have oversight if we can't see these records?
Again, Senator Paul, I want to work with you. We are working with you. We have made a lot of agreements between the two staff as to what we would request in this first round. As you know, in an investigation, there are going to be many rounds of requests for information. You collect information, you process that leads to other questions, and we'll continue to work. I just got the note because I wanted to confirm. We are meeting tomorrow at 11:30. You and I will sit down with our staff, and you have my commitment to work with you, but we have to do this in a process that works to actually get these documents, to make sure we can produce them, and to have a thoughtful investigation into this. And I'm prepared to work. I would just hope you'd be willing for us to work together and know that we're not trying to block documents. We're trying to do this in a systematic way that gets us the information that I believe would be helpful for us to answer very important questions that you're raising. I don't disagree with that, and we'll do that, and I'm looking forward to a productive meeting tomorrow at 11:30 a.m. where all of us can sit down together and at least start the process. There's not a one and done. When an investigation's never a one and done, it takes steps, and we're going to be hopefully making some meaningful steps after tomorrow's meeting, and I look forward to that. I will now move to our votes. We'll proceed first off to the consideration of S-1528. This bill deals with disaster assistance simplification. You know, after a disaster, there are various types of federal assistance that may become available to disaster survivors through different government agencies. But currently, because of restrictions on information sharing, each agency requires a different detailed application process to receive assistance, which this can take weeks or months, and survivors don't have that kind of time. This bill quite simply directs FEMA to create a universal disaster application that authorizes the necessary information sharing authorities to simplify recovery efforts and reduce the burden on survivors after a disaster. Under this bill, all information sharing practices would have to meet applicable data security standards and best practices. So I'd like to thank Ranking Member Paul and Senator Langford for introducing this bill with me, and I hope folks will join me in supporting this bipartisan effort. If there's no further debate or amendment on the question before us is final passage of S-1528. The clerk will call the roll.
Senator Carper.
Aye by proxy.
Senator Hassan. Aye. Senator Sinema. Aye. Senator Rosen. Aye. Senator Padilla. Aye. Senator Ossoff. Aye. Senator Blumenthal. Aye. Senator Paul.
Aye.
Senator Johnson.
Aye by proxy.
He
asserts that Article 5 of the NATO Treaty does not supersede Congress's power under Article 1, Section 8, Clause 11 of our Constitution to declare war. According to our Constitution, we resort to war only after the people's elected representatives deliberate and determine that it is in our best interest. My amendment is also consistent with the NATO Treaty. Article 5 of the treaty commits allies to respond to an attack, but allows each ally to determine whether to engage in military hostilities. Article 11 of the NATO treaty states its provisions are to be carried out by each country's constitutional process. We cannot delegate our responsibility to NATO, nor are we expected to. Let us reaffirm that Article 5 does not supersede Congress's responsibility to declare war.
Mr. President.
The senator from New Jersey.
I rise in opposition. Senator Paul's amendment is both entirely unnecessary, but worse than that, it's dangerous. There's no question that, like any other treaty, the NATO treaty does not supersede the Constitution. However, specifically calling out Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty here erroneously implies that there is a tension between it and the Constitution. This sends a damaging message about the U.S. commitment to the alliance at a time when support for NATO is as critical as ever given Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Further, by only referencing the NATO treaty, Senator Paul's amendment erroneously implies that other treaties may supersede the Constitution, a proposition that no senator would accept. Because Senator Paul's amendment is both unnecessary and harmful at a critical time of our engagement in Ukraine, I urge all senators to vote against it, and I reserve the balance of the time.
President,
Senator from Kentucky.
how much time do I have remaining?
Minute remaining.
I think it should be an easy vote to affirm the Constitution. To vote against affirming the Constitution actually places doubt in the Constitution. The power to declare war is the most important power and the most important vote that any legislator will ever entertain. Why is this important? Because in 2001, people voted to go to war, and this body still thinks that that vote binds us to war with no further vote. We do need to reaffirm the power and the necessity of declaring war because we are ignoring it by continuing to be involved in military activity and war around the globe without ever having voted on it as we are mandated by the Constitution.
Mr. President, is there any time remaining on our side?
53 seconds remaining. Senator from Rhode Island.
I will be very brief. My understanding of the War Powers Act, the President of the United States may initiate hostilities for a limited period of time until Congress can act. This proposal, a sense of Congress, would call into question what the War Powers Act authorizes, and that is a constitutional provision. It's been held constitutional.
29 and ask that it be reported by number.
The clerk will report by number.
Senator from Virginia, Mr. Kane, proposes amendment number 429.
I ask unanimous consent that there be 6 minutes equally divided prior to a vote on the amendment.
Is there objection? Without objection.
Madam President, this is an amendment dealing with the power of the NATO alliance. We have seen since the February 2022 invasion of Ukraine that NATO allows the democracies to link arms and stand courageously against an illegal invasion of Ukraine by the dictator Vladimir Putin.
The Senate will be in order.
Some had questioned the value of NATO, but NATO has demonstrated its power to protect democracy against this invasion since February of 2022. There had been an issue raised in the last few years about whether any president could unilaterally withdraw from NATO, which was approved by the Senate in a treaty. The Constitution of the United States indicates that the Senate must ratify treaties, but is silent about how to exit treaties. The United States Supreme Court in 1979 said that is a political question for the legislature and the executive to resolve. What this amendment would do would make plain that no one could withdraw from NATO, the United States from NATO, without either a two-thirds vote in the Senate or an act of Congress. We've received a green light for this in the Goldwater v. Carter decision in 1979. And I think of all the treaties that the U.S. has entered into right now at this moment, in the aftermath of this summit in Lithuania and during this war in Europe, this Congress should send a powerful message to our allies in NATO that we stand with this historic alliance. The administration supports this amendment. I would reserve the remainder of my time.
The senior senator from Mississippi.
For a few seconds in opposition to this amendment, it is absolutely unnecessary. I cannot think of any currently serving elected official of significance who's calling for suspending or withdrawing from NATO. If I didn't know better, I would think that this amendment might be aimed as a slap at former President Trump, but surely that is not the case. If it is, however, we should be reminded that the former president was concerned about some of NATO's members not meeting their obligations to spend 2% of GDP, but that he was fully committed to Article 5 of NATO. You will be pleased to know that this bill, NDAA, addresses the concern of the 2%. We adopted an amendment at markup, sponsored by Senator Sullivan, that would require the Secretary of Defense to prioritize NATO members who are meeting or exceeding the 2% GDP defense spending target when the DoD is making decisions on basing, training, and exercise. I yield the balance of my time.
Mr. President, how much time do I have remaining?
Is the senator opposed to the amendment?
Yes.
1 minute and 40 seconds remaining.
Could I have unanimous consent to have one additional minute?
Is there objection? Without objection, Senator from Kentucky is recognized.
It is unconstitutional for the legislature to change the Constitution. While the Constitution provides a role for both the President and the Senate when entering a treaty, it is silent regarding how to exit a treaty. When the question of treaty termination first arose in 1793, President Washington and his cabinet endorsed the view that the President's executive power included the ability to unilaterally terminate a treaty. Withdrawal from the treaty obligations permitted the U.S. to maintain neutrality in a war between France and Great Britain, and it was done unilaterally by President Washington. The power to enter treaties is found in Article 2, which vests the President with the executive power. Unlike a legislative body, the President can act with unity and dispatch, precisely the qualities needed to negotiate a treaty, so the founders grounded this authority in Article 2. Passing this amendment is tantamount to altering the Constitution because the amendment would authorize the Senate to infringe upon the executive powers of the President. The Senate has no voice when exiting a treaty. This would amend the Constitution and is unconstitutional, and that's a good thing. The founders wanted it to be difficult to commit the U.S. to international obligations and easy to get out. We should follow the Constitution and vote no on this amendment.
Time I have remaining.
1 minute, 17 seconds.
On the constitutional argument, my colleagues, this very question came before the Supreme Court of the United States in 1979. President Carter terminated a Taiwan-related treaty and was sued by Senator Goldwater and others. The case went to the United States Supreme Court. The court said because the Constitution on exiting a treaty is silent, it is a political question that the legislature and executive can resolve for themselves. The Supreme Court refused to overturn Carter's action. That is a clear green light that if Congress, the legislative and executive branch agree that on this particular treaty, the silence does not dictate but can be the source of legislation, we would be able to undertake this action. Finally, I note this is widely bipartisan, and I thank Senator Rubio and many other Democratic and Republican colleagues who have co-sponsored this amendment to stand strong at this moment with NATO. With that, I yield.
Ms. Left on this unnecessary and extraneous amendment.
1 minute and 11 seconds.
I urge a no vote for those reasons.
Question is on the amendment. Is there a sufficient second on the amendment? There appears to be. The yeas and nays are ordered, but the senator will state his inquiry.
And this will be a 10-minute vote, and those senators who arrive after 10 minutes and a brief grace period will not be allowed to vote. Is that the position of the chair?
10 minutes votes have been ordered.
I appreciate the clarity.
The clerk.
Ms. Baldwin.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President, I will shortly ask for unanimous consent to pass bipartisan legislation to extend the Chemical Facilities Anti-Terrorism Standards Program, also known as CFATS. This critical counterterrorism program was created in the wake of September 11th and the Oklahoma City bombing to ensure that common chemicals could not be stolen or weaponized by terrorists and used in an attack. Now the program is set to expire on July 27th, tomorrow, and we simply cannot let that happen. There are approximately 3,300 facilities across the United States that participate in this program. These facilities support a range of industries, from chemical manufacturing and distribution to agriculture and food production, paint and coatings operations, and healthcare and pharmaceuticals. In their everyday work, these facilities use materials that, in the wrong hands, can be turned into dangerous weapons. Because these types of industrial or commercially available materials are common and offer a simple pathway to weaponization, terrorists are more likely to try to use them. By participating in the CFETS program, facilities work with the Department of Homeland Security to develop a plan to ensure potentially hazardous material is secure. I introduced bipartisan legislation along with Senators Capito, Carper, and Langford to extend this important counterterrorism program for 5 years. The 5-year extension provides regulatory certainty and the stability for the companies and groups that participate in the program, ensuring that they can keep these important safeguards in place for longer. Companies including Dow, BASF, Lubrizol, and Brenntag North America, along with organizations like the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the American Chemical Council, the National Association of Chemical Distributors, the American Fuel and Petrochemical Manufacturers, the Agricultural Retailers Association, and the Fertilizer Institute, all of them support extending this vital national security program for another 5 years. However, last night, the House passed a 2-year extension with overwhelming bipartisan support. More than 400 members of the U.S. House voted to extend the program. And while I believe passing a longer extension to provide more certainty for companies and for the DHS would be better, the program will expire tomorrow. And if we do not pass legislation to extend it, our national security could be at risk. If this body allows this program to expire, the 3,300 facilities will no longer be required to maintain security measures, and any new high-risk facilities will not be required to invest in additional security. The Department of Homeland Security will no longer be able to assess whether facilities are high risk or share information about specific terrorist threats connected to chemical facilities. The high-risk chemical facilities would no longer be able to screen individuals who have access to sensitive areas against the terrorist screening database, which is a critical way to ensure that we're keeping these substances from getting into the wrong hands. Since it was created, CFOTS has been extended with bipartisan support 4 times. We cannot let this vital program expire. We must take urgent action to pass this 2-year extension that just passed overwhelmingly through the United States House and keep the American people safe from harm. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of H.R. 4470, which was received from the House, that the bill be considered read a 3rd time and passed, and that the motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Is there objection?
Mr. President,
Senator from Kentucky.
reserving the right to object, I rise today to object to the quick passage of H.R. 4470, which seeks to extend the Chemical Facility Anti-Terrorism Standards Program. How could anybody be against that? I'm actually for it. We should have terrorism standards. But you know what? We always had these before 9/11. How did it work before the government got involved? Well, companies had to insure things. If you had a $100 million electric plant and it was at risk for sabotage or fire or disruption of the community, you had insurance, and insurance required that you have a fence. I mean, these things happen. It's not as if safety for our utilities and public chemical plants didn't exist before 9/11. So there are ways that the marketplace would take care of this. This measure, though, which would reauthorize this regulatory program for another 2 years, I think is being rushed through the Senate without due consideration, or really any consideration at all. The Homeland Security Committee has jurisdiction over the program, yet we have not had any hearings to discuss this program or its effectiveness. This is part of the problem of government, is we tend to reauthorize things without ever examining whether they work, what doesn't work. Some programs might need more money, some programs might need less money, and we might ask ourselves, do we have any money? You know, we're $32 trillion in debt. We borrow about $1 trillion every year. It's easy to be for stuff. Everybody's got something good. Everybody's for something, but where does the money come from? We haven't really had any hearing to discuss this program or its effectiveness since the last time it was authorized, nor has the committee considered any legislation to reform the program. This program is a regulatory program. It's hundreds of regulations, and it was established to prevent the misuse of hazardous chemicals. But it also fails to understand that every company has a self-incentive to protect hazardous chemicals that is built into the nature of the way they do the business. Facilities that store certain quantities of designated chemicals of interest, though, under this legislation, must undergo a risk assessment and inspection every 2 years. If it's not reauthorized, well, it's been going on for 20 years. My guess is that the vast majority, if not all, of the utilities and chemical plants in this country have undergone this. My guess is if the program didn't exist, they would still all have fences and barbed wire and protections against terrorism because they want to protect their investment. The requirement, though, through government, though, places a burden on business, impeding their potential growth and creating unsurmountable barriers to entry for those who find the regulatory compliance too cumbersome and expensive to even attempt to break into the sector. This is why a lot of times big businesses like regulations. Regulations become a formidable barrier to new companies coming into the business. Why not have a ton of regulations? Sort of like banks. All the banking regulation, guess who likes the banking regulation? The big banks, because they can hire more compliance officers. Your local bank in your town, you know, can't afford to do it. So the local bank gets gobbled up by the bigger bank because of regulatory burden. The monetary resources required to implement and maintain these standards are substantial, and the cost implications impact not just private companies, but also the Department of Homeland Security. The United States is trillions of dollars in debt. We cannot continue to just pour money into non-essential government programs. We should have a discussion of what are the private incentives for people to protect their chemical plants, to protect their utilities. There's a long history of this. In fact, it was the history of our country until fairly recently. The Department of Homeland Security has a consistent track record of creating duplicative programs. Over the past 12 years, the Government Accountability Office, the GAO, has documented over 1,100 cases of duplicative programs created by Congress. Everybody's got a great idea. We're going to fix this, but they don't ever take time to look up to find out that somebody had the idea 3 years before and they already created a program to fix this. So sometimes we have as many as 80 different programs to fix a problem that's already been fixed previously 80 times. It should come as no surprise to any of us that our government has grown into a $6.5 trillion leviathan, and this body seems more interested in passing bills than understanding the contents of the bills, the programs, or whether these programs are working. We saved, though, over $550 billion by removing just half of GAO's identified duplicative programs. $550 billion was saved by taking the time to find out that we already have other programs doing what the new program proposes to do. I've already expressed a number of concerns about this program, but what should alarm us most about this reauthorization is that GAO already found much of this program to be duplicative of other agencies in a report from 2021. That's why I will be introducing and attaching to this bill and letting the bill go, frankly, if we can agree today to attach a small bill, but I think that could have profound implications over government. This is called the Duplication Scoring Act. So what would happen is every time someone gets a genius idea how they're going to fix your life or fix your business with another law, there would have to be a duplication score. And government would come forward and say, Oh, well, we have 32 programs that already do the same thing. Or we have 32 programs that aren't working that do the same thing. It would be what a government should normally do before creating a new program, find out if we already have existing programs. So I will be asking consent to pass this bill. I'll let the program continue, even though I think it has many problems, if we'll add a duplication scoring system to all programs in government so we can review whether they already exist and are working. This program would be produced for each bill. I think all of us can agree that there's no point in passing a bill that already exists in another fashion or already has agencies that do the same job. Before we unknowingly pass 1,000 more of these duplicative, fragmented programs, I urge my colleagues to support my amendment, which would continue the program, allow it to be reauthorized, but at the same time, begin having a duplication score on every new proposal. So I would ask to the Senate to modify the current request that my amendment, which is at the desk, is considered and agreed to, the bill as amended, be considered read a third time and passed, and that the motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Is there objection to the Senator's request to modify?
Mr. President, reserving the right to object.
Senator from Michigan is recognized.
Mr. President, I certainly fully appreciate Senator Paul's commitment to making government more efficient. I was pleased that my committee advanced his bill earlier this year. But as I had noted at the time of our passing it out of committee, the bill requires additional work before it's ready to be passed by the full Senate. We have heard from several committees who have concerns about the potential impacts of the legislation. And I hope that we can continue working over the summer to try and address those concerns and find a path forward for this legislation. However, the Chemical Facilities Anti-Terrorism Standards Program is set to expire tomorrow. We urgently need to pass this bipartisan 2-year extension now. If we do not, chemical facilities that are at risk of being exploited by terrorists will no longer be able to implement critical security measures, including ensuring that individuals in the terrorist screening database do not have access to restricted areas in these facilities. And the Department of Homeland Security will no longer be able to assess or share information about terrorist threats related to these facilities. Mr. President, our national security is on the line, and we cannot let this program expire over a completely unrelated bill about the inside workings of Congress. Mr. President, I object.
Objection is heard to the modification. Is there objection to the original request?
I object, Mr. President. I object.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President.
Senator from Ohio.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today to recognize Sharon Cohen, who retires this week from the Senate dining room. Over her almost 3 decades here, Ms. Cohen has left a lasting impression on a number of my colleagues and guests who have visited the dining room, including my children and grandchildren and the whole Senate dining team. Ms. Cohen has seen senators come and go from this building. She's been here longer than most of my colleagues. She's been here longer than I have. I always look forward to seeing Ms. Cohen. She's always welcoming. She's always gracious. She makes an effort to get to know not just every senator, but every guest who comes through the doors, regardless of who they walked in with, regardless of their political affiliation. In a place where at times relationships can be tested and debate can be intense, Ms. Cohen always made Senate dining a welcoming place. It's clear to anyone who has met Ms. Cohen that she cares deeply for the people in her life, her family, her colleagues, her guests. She seems to always be thinking about what's best for others. Among her colleagues, Ms. Cohen is known for being steady and reliable, and most importantly, for her generous spirit. She's always helping whomever she can, however she can. She never asks for anything in return. Her colleagues share that they don't think they've ever met anyone who works harder than she, and when she finishes her work, she helps everyone else who needs it. She's a team player, she's a hard worker, maybe most important, she's made a difference for so many people. Maybe all of us, my colleagues and I, can learn from that. The workers in these jobs often don't get a lot of recognition. They're too often ignored, yet they're every bit as important to the Senate as the people on the Senate floor. She brings a dignity to this job, the same kind of dignity that a carpenter who's proud of her work, or a sheet metal worker who's proud of his work, or someone who works in manufacturing, someone who works in a veterans hospital, someone who provides home care. Because all work has dignity, as she understands. Ms. Cohen's a treasured member of staff and of this institution. As her colleagues shared, they're sad to see her leave. While they know things won't be the same without her, they share Ms. Cohen's excitement for her next chapter. In retirement, she plans to spend time with her daughter and help care for her granddaughter. I know that she'll be missed by the Senate dining team. I know we'll all miss seeing her, and I appreciate not just her work, but the work of all people who serve in this body in all kinds of capacities. Ms. Cohen, thank you. Wish you a long, joyous retirement spent with your granddaughter. Congratulations. Thank you, Mr. President.